In this video, I'm going to go through the steps that you will follow to make a live paint style drawing in Illustrator. So I've already made my clean line sketch over in Photoshop. So I'm just going to bring it in by going File, Place. And what I've ended up with is one of those noodle car salesman wavy arm guys is playing a piano like a crazy man in the middle of a concert of an audience of other wavy arm noodle guy people. So I'm just going to put it in there and place it. And then to make it semi-transparent, I'm just going to grab a box and I'm going to put a white box over the top of it and turn the opacity of that box down quite a bit. So I can still see my picture, but it's not all that clear. So the box and the picture are both on this layer, so I'm going to lock this layer so it doesn't get in my way. I'll create a new layer. This layer is going to be our line tracing layer, and it might be a good idea to even name that. I'll just call it tracing. On this line, my job is to go through all of the shapes in my picture and to trace them out with a line. My main tool to do this will be my pencil tool, which is located right here. It might be under your shaper tool. The shortcut is N key. So over here in my drawing, I'm just going to go in and trace out all the lines as smoothly as possible. If it ends up wobbly, I'm just going to say, oops, I'm going to undo it, and I'm going to try it again because this is the actual line drawing that you're going to make your picture out of. You want it as nice, as smooth, and beautiful as possible. We can use this rotate tool, rotate view tool, to shift things around so they're at an easier angle for us to draw with. And then go back to our pencil tool and continue to trace out. I'm intentionally overlapping on my lines. That was awful. There. Like right here, these lines extend quite a bit beyond where I need them to. They're going to be cut off right at the corner. But that will allow for a much better looking picture later on if we allow all of our lines to overlap each other. And that will make sense later. Up in the hair, it's going to start to look kind of messy as I do this. But later on, we'll clean it up and it will look really great by allowing this bit of extra overlap on the ends. Besides the pencil tool, you also have your shape tools. I'll just use the ellipse tool to draw out the eyes and the move tool to rotate and get those into the right place to match. And the pen tool works great for straight lines along the way that I need. So like these straight lines here, I can just tap, tap, tap. Then when I get to a curved line, I can hold and drag to make a curve right here, and hold down Alt and tap to end my line. And I can get myself some really nice straight lines that turn into curved lines as I go, like that. So using your pen tool and your pencil tool and your shape tools, you'll go through your whole picture and outline everything you need to outline as nice and smooth and good looking as possible. So here's my picture all traced out, and there's only one thing I need to do to add to these lines, and that is to close up the loose ends. As you can see, like down here, those two lines are open, and I won't be able to live paint those later on. And I've also got that going on over in this area here. So what I'm going to do for most of it is to just draw a box around. Make sure I'm on the same tracing layer, grab a box, and draw it close to where I want my picture to end so that I am cutting off the edge of those lines, overlapping them. I'm going to cut it up a little bit because I don't believe I'm going to go that far down here. But you can see that closes off most of the lines. And then anywhere else that we still need to close things off, let's create a few lines, clean things up, so that we won't have that trouble when we go to live paint. Once it's all cleaned up and everything is outlined, the next step is to add a line profile to all of the lines that you've drawn in here. So I'm just going to select everything by hitting Control A, and if you are on your selection tool, up at the top you should see a few options up here. If you don't see those options, make sure that you are in your Essentials Classic workspace. And up here under Uniform, I have the option to choose different profiles for my lines. I'm going to choose this profile that starts skinny and gets thicker and then goes skinny again. When I tap on that, you don't notice much at first because the line width is basically 0. It drops everything down to nothing. So I'm going to thicken it up a bit, and you can see your lines coming in here and looking quite different. They start thin, they go thicker in the middle, then they go thin near the end. So just find a thickness that looks good for your drawing. You can even go half widths if you want. If you think that maybe 2.5 looks good, you can go in there and type in 2.5 and get that middle width as well. That looks pretty good for mine. And the lines are already starting to look pretty interesting. So with all those lines still selected, the next step would be to turn them into shapes. You'll notice right now they're lines. They have a line running right down the middle, and the thickness varies as you go along, but it's still drawn out by a single line. If I go to Object and expand Appearance, you'll notice that they turn into shapes instead of lines. Now the outline goes around the whole edge, and they overlap, and there are sections of different shapes where they overlap. I'm going to keep everything selected because there's one more step to do while I've got them all where I want them, and that is to use the Pathfinder tool to slice them apart. So if my Pathfinder tool is not visible, I'll go to Window and open up Pathfinder. And then inside of Pathfinder, we have this divide option. You can see it doesn't remove apart like up here. It just slices a line everywhere two shapes cross. So if I go in here, you can see that these shapes cross there, and there's a separate section in the middle. If I hit divide with everything selected, it divides them all, and now these are all individual shapes. So what I'm going to do is take my selection tool, and I'm going to get rid of the shapes that I don't need. This is why it was okay to let them overlap, because that keeps this line thick enough up here that it looks nice. And then I can just go in here and delete this section. I do need to go into isolation mode to do this. So to get into isolation mode, all we do is double click on a line, and you can see that everything else becomes more dim around it, and I can select just one part of it now. And I select it and hit delete. Select that and hit delete, and you see how it cleans up these lines here. It makes them pretty beautiful. There's a remnant of the path right there, so I'll even delete that as well. But you just go through and you delete any of these extra points that you don't need. You might want to go in and delete those extra paths as well. It'll make it easier to paint it later. And you'll go through the whole picture, take your time, and clean it up. And doing it this way gives you this really fun line quality, where it's thick and then thin and flows around, and it looks kind of comic book-ish. So here's my cleaned up line art. You'll notice I'm still in isolation mode. It says so over here. We've got the red line. Stuff is grayed out. So to get out of isolation mode, I'll just double tap to go back into regular mode. And it's looking pretty good. We've got most of the extra line ends deleted. The one last thing I would do before the next step is make sure that it's clean. So there might be some lines hidden in here, some paths that I haven't deleted. And so I'll just switch to my selection tool, and I'll draw a box around any section here, and it will highlight everything that's there, including these paths that are otherwise invisible. So I've got a little piece there, I've got a piece there, I've got a piece there. So I want to go in and go back in isolation mode by double clicking and get rid of some of these extra pieces that I noticed. And that'll just make it a whole lot easier and cleaner when you're actually doing the coloring part next. So when everything is cleaned up and beautiful and you're ready to go, I would make a copy of your lines just in case you need to change it in the future. So let's hide the sketch. And I'm just going to go on to the layer where I have everything. Control A to select it all, Control C to copy it all. Then I'll create a new layer down here. Make sure I've got that layer selected, and then paste it using Control F, which will paste it in exactly the same spot you copied it from. And then I'll turn that off for now so that I can only work with this layer. So now we are going to turn this into a live paint canvas. So I will select everything on there again with Control A, and I'm going to go to Object, Live Paint, Make. And it will combine these all together and treat all of these shapes as if they were a single drawing. Over here, under the Shape Builder tool, we can find the Live Paint Bucket tool, which when we're using live paint works just like a paint bucket. So I'm going to deselect things and I'll come back to that. And I'll start by choosing a color that I think is good for Mr. Noodle. A red color that's not overly bright. And this can be easily adjusted. And then I just go into the area and I just tap to color, just like a coloring book. So you can see down here, I missed a space where I cleaned up the path. There was still a path in there, but no worries, it just makes a couple more steps. You have to click on all of the places there to make sure it's full. And you just go through and paint everything, but paint it using colors you think will work well, colors that are kind of a mid-tone value, because later on we are going to add some highlights and shadows to it. Right here, I've got a line that didn't get deleted. I could delete that if I want. I can also go in and use that paint bucket tool to color it the same color that I'm coloring this over here, and that hides it as well. So here's my finished colored piece. I've thought very carefully about the colors and adjusted them so they look like they all go together. I've left the background blank because I decided to do a Photoshop background so that I can kind of more free-handedly paint that in. So now what we want to do, the last step, is to add some highlights and shadows to really make it pop and look good. I need to get out of live paint and isolation mode, so I'll double click, get out of that. And then just to make sure everything's a happy shape rather than being connected to anything it shouldn't, I'll just select it all and then re-expand it so that everything is an individual shape. So for my shadows, I'm actually going to go in to my already existing picture and I'm going to slice away pieces of it and color that a different color. So I'm going to go up close. For example, I imagine there's a spotlight coming down kind of onto his face, and so there's going to be some shadow around the back of his neck and his head. I see the light hitting his forehead, and as his face curves down, it will get darker. So I'm going to go in here and grab the knife tool. Okay. So I'm going to select his face first. So it's all grouped together still. So I'm going to double click on the face to go back in isolation mode and click until it allows me to choose just the face shape. You'll see that other things like the eyes kind of became pale because I'm in isolation mode. And I'm going to use the knife tool to do this. Knife tool might be hidden under your eraser tool. If you cannot find it anywhere, make sure you are on the Essentials Classic workspace. I went to Windows, Workspace, Essentials Classic. And with this knife, I'm just going to, as smoothly as possible, cut a line for the shadow that goes across the shape, curves down around, maybe comes back up, and you'll see it tries to kind of smooth itself out as you go, which is really nice. And so now I've made a cut, and these are two different shapes. If I go to my selection tool, I can choose just this side right here. And I can darken that down by changing the color. So now that part of his face is in shadow. you can see how we can add some pretty fun shadows very simply in here. I think his arm is going to be mostly in shadow back here, with the front coming into the light. So I'll double click to get just the arm. As you can see, I've got quite a mess going on in here, so maybe I'm going to grab these different shapes in here that make up all of that, and I'm going to just use my Pathfinder tool to combine those all into a single shape so I can work with it more easily. Then with the knife tool, I imagine the light will come from up here, hit the shoulders. By the time we get down here, is mostly just shadow in this area right there. Then again, I go back in, I select just these parts, and actually, if I go to the eyedropper tool by hitting the I key, I can sample right from that shadow that I had before, and color those up to be the same color. So very carefully, in thinking about where the light is coming from, I'm going to go through my whole picture. I'm going to cut apart areas and add shadow wherever I think it is needed.